Well, if there were ever a time to move to New York City as young and broke and an ambitious person, it's now. We promise this is not a joke. It's actually the argument being made in a Bloomberg opinion column out today that backs up the assertion by referencing a number of recent statistics. Bloomberg Quick Take reporter Jennifer Zabasaja is here with the details. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, so Bloomberg opinion columnist Connor Sen writes that this might be a once-in-a-generation opportunity for ambitious young people to head to a city like New York. What do you think? And we actually have Connor joining us now from Atlanta to discuss. Connor, thanks so much for being with us today. So you got to walk us through this. Young, ambitious, broke, New York City, move here. What do you mean by this?
Well, so obviously the pandemic has changed a lot in our daily lives and in cities. And over the past year, we've seen people switch from renting to home ownership for those who can and have the means to do that. And we've also seen a shift of people out of high-cost cities towards lower-cost cities, whether it be places like Austin and Miami in the Sun Belt, or even places like Fresno, sort of maybe aren't as sexy, but they're seeing the same dynamic where cheap rents are attracting people. And so now as vaccinations pick up and we look forward to the end of the pandemic, we see that you can get New York and San Francisco at a big discount to what you could historically.
Yeah, and as someone who's lived in New York for 10 years, this is really shocking to me. But good. I mean, in your article, you outline that you think the pandemic might create two different kinds of cities, right? So can you walk us through what those are and sort of who would be likely to move to those cities that you outline?
Sure. So if you're young and you're just starting out in your career, sort of having access to those networks and in-person opportunities and mentors and just workplace culture is really important. And so that's where a city like New York has a lot of value, whereas a lot of the cities that have become really attractive over the past 9 months are more about remote work and maybe mid-career workers who don't need all of that stuff, just looking for cheaper housing costs and more space. And so what you could see is sort of a tiering of a handful of cities might be the go-to places for people who want that mentorship and career advancement. And then other cities become more focused on attracting remote workers who don't need all that stuff.
And so you're in Atlanta. Is Atlanta one of those cities, or where does it fall on the spectrum, would you say?
I would say we're more in the remote work camp. If I were 22, I'd rather be in New York than Atlanta. I moved here when I was 30, so I'd already sort of gotten my seasoning in San Francisco. And I think it's a great place if you're that mid-career person who maybe can't afford a house in New York or San Francisco. But if you're young and starting out, I'd rather be in a place like New York.
That's welcome news. And so then, with so much uncertainty, Connor, I wonder, do you see these types of changes as long-term changes to the city, or do you think at some point, I mean, we always hear people talking about returning to normalcy. Do you think cities like New York will return back to a pre-pandemic normalcy and start to skyrocket again?
Well, I think we never go back to the way things were. I think when we talk about normal for a place like New York, that hopefully means apartments are full, office buildings are full, or repurposed, whatever the case may be. And so I do think New York will get back to a normal. It'll just be a different normal than it was before. And I think this world of somewhat more remote work and sort of using the opportunities and experiences of the past year to reshape our future is certainly going to happen.
And aside from New York, what are some other cities that you think people should be looking at?
Well, the ones that have really fallen the most in price are these ones that have a lot in common with New York in terms of sort of where well-educated people have flocked to for in-person stuff. So New York, Boston, DC, Seattle, LA, and San Francisco. I'd say those are the big six.
And Connor, just finally, I mean, I know you've been working from home now for what, a few years now, but I wonder if you could move anywhere at this point in time, where would you pick? Would it be New York City? Would it be Manhattan?
I would be here just because I've got a wife and 2 kids, and I work remotely for Bloomberg, and that's great. And so I don't really need that mentorship and in-person activity. But again, if I were in my 20s right now, I would move back to New York.
You are still ambitious, though, working for Bloomberg day in, day out and writing something like this. So Bloomberg opinion columnist Connor Sen, thanks so much for your time. Really good advice that you're giving out to young, ambitious people today. Tim?
All right. Thanks so much, Jen. Yeah, I like the optimistic view of New York City as well. Well, coming